Good afternoon. I see the participants are beginning to arrive here out of the waiting space into the webinar space. We'll just give this a moment to allow everybody to be checked into the meeting. You're here for the AALHE webinar on foundational statement number 1, what is assessment in higher education? We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, it looks like our number is steady, so let's begin. Greetings and welcome to the webinar series. I'm Paula Haynes, a member of the AALHE Professional Development Committee's webinar team, and I'm so pleased that you're here with us today. Before we get started, we have a few pieces of housekeeping. First, we want to let you know that we're recording this webinar, and it will be available to members after the webinar is finished on our website. Because of the number of participants, everybody will be muted and we won't be doing live questions. But if you have a question, we really hope you'll use it, type it in using the Q&A tool, which you can see in your Zoom toolbar. What you type won't be seen by the entire group, but I will be monitoring that and passing on as many questions as possible to our presenters when we have an opportunity. You can also let me know in that Q&A tool if you are having any issues with Zoom technology, and we will try to address those as they arise. After the webinar is done, you'll get an email with me, from me with a link to the recording, the PowerPoint slides, and a link to our evaluation. We really want you to take a few minutes to fill that survey out for us. AALHE does use those results to improve and better provide webinars to the community. And now it's time to begin. I am very pleased to be able to introduce our presenters for today. Cynthia Howell has served as faculty for leadership for higher education in the Graduate School of Education at Capella University since 2004. She designs and teaches courses on assessment, education program evaluation, advising and retention, and other topics, and serves on dissertation committees as chair or member. Cynthia's taught courses in assessment to over 1,000 emerging and practicing professionals in higher education. Also with us is Jill Allison Kern, Director of Assessment and Accreditation at Eastern Washington University. She has worked in the field of higher education assessment and accreditation since 2004. She's consulted to colleges and universities on assessment and accreditation in the U.S. and abroad. Jill has taught undergraduate and MBA students as an assistant professor of management at Iowa State University's College of Business and was a consultant to McKinsey & Company in the areas of organizations, knowledge management, and talent management. Finally, our third speaker is Jeremy Penn. He was the co-chair of the writing team that developed the first foundational statement. All of our panelists participated in that process. Jeremy is also the past president of AALHE. His current professional position is the assessment coordinator in the College of Education at the University of Iowa. Prior assessment positions included student affairs assessment and directing a large university testing center. So Cynthia, Jill, and Jeremy, thank you for being with us here today. And please take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Glad to have everyone here this afternoon. We wanted to start by providing a big thank you to the members of the writing team who participated as part of this group. So these folks participated in numerous meetings last fall and into the spring, working on putting together the statement, on talking through the various issues and background readings, and working on developing the things that you'll see later in the presentation today. So we're so glad and so grateful for the participation of as many folks across the writing team members. Now, if this wasn't a webinar, I would pause for a round of applause, but I don't think we can hear that over the webinar. But let's just all together imagine that we're doing that in our minds. We're going to take a really quick step out for just a second and take a quick poll so we get a sense of who is in the presentation today. So if you wouldn't mind answering a few questions about who you are, these should appear on your screen. So just take a moment to indicate whether or not you're a current member of AALHE, whether or not you served on the foundational statement writing group, and what you would describe your primary role on your campus. So really just curious to know kind of the makeup of the folks here today, if their kind of level of familiarity with the statement, and also what the role is for the folks, whether they're assessment professionals, faculty members, some kind of other campus role, or some other kind of non-university affiliated or non-college affiliated role. So we'll give that just a minute for you to answer. Okay, maybe just another little bit to get your answers in. Okay, should we go ahead and take a peek at the results so we can see who's here? Okay, 86% of attendees today are members and 14% are not members. Of course, those of you that are not members, we'd love to have you join us as members in the future if you're able to do that. Number two, did you serve on the Foundational Writing Committee? No, so we only have the three presenters that were on the committee in the session today. And then the primary role, 77% were assessment professionals, 5% faculty, 14% other, and then 1%, or sorry, 1 or 5% not working at a college or university. So that helps us understand our audience today, and we will make sure we go into good depth into the statement because it looks like we don't have very many participants who were part of the writing team on this group. So that's great that we're being able to share this with some new folks. So I'm going to give a quick overview of the agenda for today, and then we'll jump right into our topic. So today we're going to talk about the background of this project, why we're doing this. We'll then dive into the process used by the committee to develop and write the statement. We'll also talk in detail about the charge that the AALHE board sent to the committee and the exact task that the group sought to complete. Then we'll take a look at the statement itself, and we'll have a chance for some feedback and comments about the statement, and we'll be able to take a few questions using the chat box, the Q&A box, excuse me. And then we'll talk about the voting process that the organization will use to make a decision about this statement, and then we'll take some next steps for moving forward. All right, so I'm going to take the lead here in the first section. We are going to jump right into describing why we're doing this and some background about where this came from. So one of the things I've been doing in the last week is watching a fascinating webinar on Woodstock on Netflix. Its 50th anniversary of Woodstock was this year, and actually my parents were also married in 1969, so we've had some nice celebrations for their 50th anniversary this year. And one of the things that was amazing to me when I was watching the documentary was how unprepared the festival leads were in being prepared to organize an event of this nature. And they certainly were totally unprepared for the amount of enthusiasm and the number of participants that showed up at the conference. They really, some of them really did not know who were, the people that were leading the event really did not know what they were doing when they were putting this all together and were really learning as they were going. So I think that's something that we wanted to think about as we were working in this process ourselves, in that one of the reasons we were doing this is we wanted to learn how to do this effectively. We wanted to learn how to create shared foundational statements as an organization, as a place for supporting the voice of assessment professionals. This was something we hadn't done in the past and wanted to learn what that process looked like, and wanted to develop an approach for doing this effectively so we could then roll that out in future years and build on what we learned to do this well. So it's something we really were thinking about. So, we wanted to answer some of these important questions about how to do this. So we even wondered, first of all, would anyone be interested in participating in a group that takes on a task of this sort? We can answer that with a resounding yes at this point. We were curious about how to identify a structure or things to organize the activities of a group in order to do this effectively, and we identified several strategies during the time together that helped make the process more smooth as we went forward. We were curious about how to organize the voting on a statement like this. It's something we hadn't done before as an organization, so it was something that we wanted to try to figure out how to do it, and we're still in process of testing that out, and the voting will start in October. So we'll be using SurveyMonkey to do the voting starting next month, and we'll see how that goes. We had a lot of discussion about what criteria to use to decide whether or not a statement has been approved by the organization. So we're going to set a pretty high bar with this first round of statement and see how this goes. But the requirements the board set forth for the approval of a foundational statement is 50% participation of the members, with 2/3 of those who are voting in favor of a statement. So it's a pretty high bar for approval of a statement of this sort, but we think a statement that's foundational to the organization should receive a high level of support from the organization and should be something that is generally regarded as approved by the membership to be really a foundational statement. We were also curious about really if it's possible to get 50% of the membership to do anything. So we'll see how this goes, but one of the things we'll ask you to help with is to help us get the word out and to encourage your colleagues to participate in the vote and see if we can get to that 50% mark for getting the statement voted on. The next thing, getting back to the Woodstock discussion here, this is a fun picture of the line of traffic coming into the concert. It looks a bit like people leaving the football game here last Saturday, that long line of cars with traffic barely moving. So another thing that was been fascinating to me about the Woodstock documentary is how the attendees talked about feeling like they were finding people who had a similar belief system to theirs, and that they had a message that they wanted to share with the world about what they valued and what their beliefs were. And it was more than just a concert to them. It was really a place where they could find like-minded individuals and find a place where their combined voice together would be more powerful than it would be individually. And for me, that's a very similar experience that I had coming to my first AALHE meeting years ago now. But finding people who were doing similar work that I was doing and who had very similar values and beliefs, and finding a place that I really felt like I belonged was really a powerful experience for me. So that's the second reason why we wanted to do this, was we wanted to have a way to communicate a message, a bigger message with the world about what we believe and what we value, and recognizing that our combined voices together will be more powerful than any individual voice speaking alone. So some of the background for this, at the time we were really talking about these foundational statements. There were a number of fairly high-profile articles that received some attention in Inside Higher Ed and the New York Times and some other places, really coming out as critical about the work of assessment. And there was quite a bit of discussion on the Assess listserv and amongst the board members and other members of AALHE about how do we respond, what should we do, should there be some kind of statement from AALHE or from board members or from members to respond to articles such as these that have a particular position on assessment to provide a stronger voice, advocating for the importance of assessment and for how it's valuable for higher education institutions to be engaged in these things. So we had a lot of discussion about this, but there were several challenges and issues that we hadn't addressed at that point that limited our ability to respond quickly. So some of them were, at the time, we really had no process by which to create and approve statements of this sort. So we hadn't done anything like that before, and it was something that we hadn't even built a process to do. So at the time, we couldn't just jump in and make a statement and approve it because we didn't have a way to do that at that time. And additional problems were that it was difficult to know where to start in that process. So we could have started, there's a whole bunch of options that were debated around and talked about with the board. So, you know, we could revisit the principles, the AALHE principles of effective practice, and revise those in some way with some additional items, or update them or endorse them by the organization, the AALHE organization. We could, develop an organization-wide response to one or more of the articles, write a response commentary, or write a letter to the editor that's jointly signed by the board members or something of that sort. That was another option we debated pursuing. Asking the AALHE president just to write something on behalf of the organization, which again has risks in that if the president's views don't align with the views of the membership, there might be members that are upset with that statement, or the members might feel like their voice is not really being represented by a statement that the president wrote that may not reflect what they believe. Another thought was we could poll the members on the most important issues and identify top issues that should be addressed, and start by working through those issues based on poll responses. But again, there was a question of whether that would really help us answer the questions about the process we need to use, and if that would really be a good place to get systematically going in a process of developing foundational statements. And there was also, if you recall, there was also a joint response that was authored and signed by many assessment professionals. Should AALHE just vote to approve that as a organization? But again, that idea was born out of building on this work that had been done through the assess list from other places. But again, we didn't really have a process as an organization to do this. We didn't really have a determined standard by which a level of vote would be required, or any kind of other process by which to vet such statements. So there's certainly a feeling that we had a voice that we wanted to bring forth, and we wanted to combine our efforts to be a stronger advocate for the work of effective assessment, but we didn't really have a way to do that effectively at that time. So this is how we kind of got to where we are. After a lengthy discussion, the board decided to start at the very beginning with a kind of reasonable size project that could be completed in a reasonable amount of time that would allow AALHE to figure out the process, so kind of test out the kinks in the process, figure out the issues with the voting, try to determine how to organize the writing team effectively, and also be a starting point for future statements. So they really came back to the very beginning kernel of the question of this idea of what is assessment as the place to get this all started, knowing that the future groups will build on this, and that'll help us sort out what this process will look like and identify any of the issues that arise through the steps of creating a foundational statement for the organization. So that's kind of how we ended up at this this question that this team was charged with addressing. And then the third reason that we're doing this is, like I said, it's really a starting point for future statements. So this is not intended to be a statement that covers every issue or topic or aspect of assessment that could be conceived of, but really it's just a beginning point that future statements will build upon. And just like with our Woodstock analogy here, if you recall, there were additional Woodstock festivals, one of them held in 1994, and then one of them held in 1999 that did not really follow the same ideals of peace, love, and harmony that perhaps the original attendees had hoped for. But I think those things are examples of how something beginning can build into a bigger future idea, and that's really what we're hoping for with these foundational statements, is that this first statement is a jumping off point for future groups to use a similar process, a similar voting method, and really follow the same process, but building on the work of this initial group. So then, to getting around to the actual work of this group, and my two colleagues here will talk about the process in more detail in just a second, but I wanted to mention a little bit about how the writing group members were selected. So we started by identifying the board said this was the topic we wanted to address. So we opened up a call for participants and asked them to send in a short application to participate as a volunteer with the group. We then reviewed the applications and set aside a goal of having a diverse panel. So we identified the institution type that the volunteers were from, including things like size, geography, type of student served, and so forth, to have a diversity of views represented. Of course, we also needed a willingness to participate in a number of meetings, and we weren't really sure at the time how many meetings that would be or what they would look like. So kind of a willingness to jump into something we hadn't really done before. We also then, if there were tiebreakers between people who had similar institution types, willingness to participate, then we would use a years of experience in assessment as the tiebreaker, with those having more years of experience as a tiebreaker. And this was not to say that people who are newer to assessment don't have an important view to hold, but really we just needed a way to decide who would participate in the group in this round. So that was kind of an easy way to do some of that decision making. Okay, so I'll turn it over to my two colleagues to talk about what process is used by the group. And I think, Jill, you're talking next.
I am. I needed to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Kern from Eastern Washington University, where I'm the Director of Assessment and Accreditation. And Cynthia Howell and I are going to be talking about what the experience was as a member of this working group. I'm going to be provide more overview, and I think Cynthia is going to get much more into the specifics. How do I change the slide? How do I go to the next slide? Voila. So the team worked, this is actually not us. This is an image I found on Google Images. But we did work together by Zoom. So, so we held numbers of meetings and did a lot of work kind of face to face, but remotely. Okay. Next. This is the actual one of the actual work products. The first thing that we were asked to do as members was, since we're all assessment professionals, come up with our own individual definition. How do we define assessment? And what is it about our own definition that is important to us? Next slide, please. So after, so we worked both, you know, as a group with kind of collective meetings, and then between meetings we would do our individual work, but on a shared document. So the first was our individual definitions of assessment, and then we did essentially a literature review, and each of the, I'm sorry, there's mowing of the lawn in the background, I hope you can hear me. We were asked to do a literature review and find the definitions of assessment that are in the literature that we as individuals endorse, and so and to provide the citations for those. So these were kind of the original ways of us kind of gathering data, gathering kind of a pool of information about what assessment is, so that we could then distill them into a shared statement. Next slide. So sticking with the Woodstock theme, we started off as a group doing with the writing event was, you know, we started off as a group and we worked harmoniously. And I also wanted to say, we also, in addition to there being a lot of harmony, there was also a lot of disagreement. Always, it was never contentious, but we really debated and deliberated about what we wanted the assessment statement, what the foundational statement was going to be. So there was both agreement and disagreement. I could not find a slide of any form of dissension from Woodstock. So I chose Hills Nash Young because they are famous not only for their harmony, but also for splitting up many times, coming back together, and really kind of fighting about each of their individual artistic visions. So after kind of working as a group to generate these spreadsheets of information, we then decided that we wanted to hand it off to individuals to distill it. So one person on the team took the first stab at distilling the various statements or the various kind of pieces of information that we had, and kind of seeing what was common to both our individual definitions as well as to the ones that we found in the literature. And after that was kind of massaged into a statement by an individual, then a second individual took that and refined it, and then it went to a third individual who did the same thing. And with each iteration, there was a lot of conversation, and then finally we came up with a statement that we then brought back to the whole working group. That's the group on the bottom, dancing and singing. And it was through that process that we came to a consensus about what the statement should be. Do I have one more page? Can we switch to the next slide? So having the group kind of come up with because the writing task, it's tricky figuring out how do you write as a group. So there were periods of collective writing and then individual writing and then going back to the collective. And then once we had our shared statement, we're now bringing it to you, and this is you, the legions of people who are going to vote on our statement. I'd like to now turn it over to Cynthia.
Jill, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Cynthia Howell here from Capella University. I have gathered most of my experience with assessment, first of all, way back when I was working on accreditation committees and steering committees and so forth. And this was back in 1990, the college where I was academic dean. We were one of the first ones where assessment was very, very stressed. Rather than inputs, what goes into our efforts, what are the outputs? Are our students really learning what they are supposed to? And it caught my faculty completely off guard. I remember one of the senior faculty saying, grading should be enough. And grading is actually, as we all know, it's making a judgment about what the assessment results are. So I was very honored to be invited to participate of this committee. And the notes that I'm going to show you going forward in these the next couple of slides are the process that we all adopted as we would come together, as Jill said, Zoom meetings, and then go home and do our homework and then come back together. But the first task is, as Jill said, was work on a broad definition of assessment. And that's where we really dug into what is currently out there. And I came to be aware of how much confusion there is, how much misunderstanding. People are using the same word but meaning different things. Very often they're meaning evaluation, such as in program evaluation, where it's not program assessment, it's program evaluation if we are examining the effectiveness. So we tasked ourselves with many iterations. Our perspectives, which we hope were very representative of the membership in its entirety. The second task then, as Jill explained, was more narrowly defining assessment of student learning, because ultimately that's what assessment is all about. My friend and very esteemed practicing professional, Linda Susky, says ultimately what it's all about in higher education is determining if students are learning what they're supposed to be learning. And that's where assessment falls down. We started with Thomas Angelo's definition. And a piece of that is it's an ongoing process aimed at understanding and improving student learning, but it has various components. We found as we were conducting our own discussions, we were coming up with even more components. Obviously, Tom Angelo wrote this quite some time ago, and so we were adding a lot of elements that we thought really needed to be addressed. But then we had to keep an eye on what we were doing. Next slide, task 3. What are the topics that should be included in a foundational statement of what is assessment? So we had to keep reining ourselves back in. Pardon the cowboy talk, but I'm from South Dakota. So we reined ourselves in to keep it very focused on a foundational statement, particularly addressing what is assessment. Now, there on your screen you can see some of the many topics that we initially did consider. And we had to do this over many, many meetings because there was so much discussion and so much, as I said, reining ourselves in. But all of these items in this list are highly important. There are others as well, and so as Jeremy started our meeting with, this is the first of our foundational statements. We are well aware that there will need to be more as well, but ultimately it's going to lead to continuous quality improvement. The next slide.
Wait.
Yeah.
Can I just, so.
Please do, Jill. Yes.
Sure. Maybe you'll say this on the next slide. What we ultimately decided as a group, because we went through, as Cynthia was saying, kind of a lot of back and forth, and we decided that our task was very much to come up with a generic statement, not about what good assessment is, but just a definition of assessment in higher education. And so something that everybody could agree to, of the what is it. So the statement itself seems perhaps a little anodyne, but that was actually intentional. We wanted to have something that was, that everyone could agree with. And it was interesting, our process was very interesting to see how however many there were of us, 11 or 12, is that we had, there was a lot of differing opinions about assessment and what's good assessment and not. But the statement that we came to was one that we could all sign off on, and that was what we wanted for the association.
Thank you so much, Jill, because I suppose in the minds of many of you on the call right now, as soon as we get to the foundation statement, which we're going to present, and I'm sure you've already read as well, we are very well aware that there's a lot more to it. We do need to define what effective, good assessment is, but first we've got to have this foundational statement about what assessment itself is. And meant to mention a little bit too, and that is we are, as you well know, growing. AALHE is growing and growing, and we're becoming a recognized authority in this field. People are looking to us for accurate information and very beneficial information, and therefore in the back of our minds we're always thinking, okay, not only what represents our organization, what represents the membership, but what is going to be credible. We all went through lit reviews searching for the various definitions of assessment. When we came down to what our own definition should be, of course it reflected the massive lit review that we did, but it also is going to be a very credible, authoritative statement that others who are going to be citing AALHE can go to. It's going to be a go-to definition of assessment. We're asking you to vote on that, but we're hoping that we've done a good job for you. So this particular slide, and again, we started in 2018. We've been doing this for a long time. The members of the committee did the review of the literature. We engaged in the wide-ranging discussions. As I showed on the previous slide, we agreed upon this draft statement in January, just this past January. And then we were very pleased when we received a notification that the foundational statement did receive approval from the board at its March meeting. But that's not what's the final step. We need to have membership approval of this. It's not just something that the board does. We are a membership organization, and therefore we made our first step when we presented, Jeremy and Jill and I, and Jean Marie was there a little bit as well. The foundational statement was the closing session of the 2019 AALHE conference held this past June in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it when we all head off to New Orleans next June. And so with that, Jeremy, I believe I'm going to turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, with that background in mind and with the description of the task and the work of the group, I'm going to share with you the statement. You should have also received a copy of this as a PDF file and an email at about 1:45 this afternoon. So you should be able to look at it there. If you can see that better, then you can see it on this screen. So I'll just walk through briefly the statement and provide a little bit of additional commentary on what's in here. And then we'll have a chance to address some questions, comments, concerns. You can put those in the Q&A box whenever they occur to you. And then we'll visit about the statement for a little bit, and then we'll wrap up with a short description of some next steps, how we'd like for you to help us, and a little bit more about the voting process. So this is the statement the group developed. It starts out by providing a overall description of what assessment is. Then there's 2 paragraphs. The second paragraph is more about learning outcomes assessment. The third one is more about institutional effectiveness assessment. And then the last paragraph is really more about the overarching aim of assessment and the role that AALHE sees itself in promoting that. So the first paragraph is really about assessment as a process to collect and analyze information to determine if progress is being made toward the end. Focuses on a pretty broad definition. Like we were talking about, we didn't want to define assessment in a way that was unique to a particular type of campus. For example, in the Education College here, we would talk about assessing students' achievement of the in-task standards, which could be a very narrow way of thinking about assessment, but would speak to us, but maybe wouldn't speak to colleagues at a community college or at a arts and sciences college, say. Focuses on learning outcomes and also institutional effectiveness within the context of higher education. So we thought that was important too, because we have many colleagues in K-12 education who do a lot of assessment as well, and that's often a different type of effort than it is in higher education, given the context of how those 2 different institutions work. So then the second paragraph here is really about student learning outcomes assessment, and paragraphs 2 and 3 are really parallel with each other. So this one talks about how the members of the higher education community identify what students should be able to do, and then they determine the degree to which they meet those goals, and then thinking about how to use that information to improve the teaching learning process. And in the same way, paragraph 3 talks about institutional effectiveness assessment, focusing on an institution's progress toward achieving its mission and vision, and how it's engaging in that process, how they use the information then to take action in that as well. And then the last paragraph talks about the aim of student learning assessment, institutional effectiveness assessment, about enhancing quality and AALHE's support in these efforts to promote assessment for learning, not just of learning. So I'll pause here. We'll look and see if as questions come in, and then the panelists here can provide some answers to those. And then we will visit for a bit and then wrap up with a few closing thoughts here. So there is one question that has come in so far, and I'll read it to you. It is, will AALHE pursue a statement of what good student learning assessment, sorry, let me try that again. Will AALHE pursue a statement of what good student learning assessment is, regardless of whether it's a generic statement aimed at the not provoke dissent, does not pass? Yeah, definitely. So I think that's on the list, high on the list of future statements to get at that issue of what good assessment looks like. It was the place where I think that we felt like we could address several of those articles that were critical of assessment. At least in my view, they were talking about assessment that was practiced in a way that we would, at least I would not define it as good assessment. So they were rejecting some of the same things that I would reject as not being effective practices. But other panelists, do you want to address that a little bit too?
Yes, and I believe that the process is going to be the same. We'll probably be issuing an invitation for people who would like to participate in the development of that kind of a foundational statement, because as I meant, this is Cynthia, by the way, as I mentioned, this was just the initial foundational statement. We are aware that there are going to be at least several more, and this will be a process that takes place probably over the next few years. I'm putting in a vote for when we all are at the New Orleans conference coming up next June 2020, that we continue to keep on our radar the need for developing such foundational statements. Definitely, we need to know what good assessment is. I teach assessment courses at the graduate level, of course, at Capella University, and that's always an issue among my learners who are practicing professionals in higher education. How do I know if it's really going to contribute to ongoing enhancement of quality? That's the bottom line. That's how I determine that. Thank you.
And I'll just add that I want to go back to what Jeremy had said, that a number of the critics who are kind of, in the popular press, that what they were describing was they were critiquing assessment by describing poorly done assessment. And so, yes, we want to first kind of have a baseline of what is assessment, and then what does good assessment look like. And I anticipate that there will be a number of competing visions about what constitutes good assessment, with some people being very adamant about validity and reliability, and other people saying, no, this is more heuristic research. So it'll be an interesting process.
I'm gonna, this is Paula, I'm gonna direct your attention to the chat window as well, where a couple of questions have popped up, or a comment and a couple of questions have popped up. I'll read those for you. The first sentence in the statement implies the presence of existing goals. However, it can exist in the absence of goals. So the question there is, that assessment can be done to inform goal development. How can the statement include the role of assessment in formalizing goals? And then also following up on that, revising goals.
Yeah, that's a great question. Oh, go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, I was just going to say, this is absolutely what many of my grad students have had to address too, and particularly when they are designing courses or programs or so forth, they say, first I have to do this, I have to get the textbook, and I have to create the assignments, and actually assessment is done the other way around. It's backward design. We start with where we want to go. So there can be that unfolding process, but before we actually begin assessment, we have to know where we're going. It's like a map. We have to have a destination in mind, and then we're able to map out how we get there. Am I understanding the question correctly?
I think so. Obviously, the asker can't speak up.
Right.
Thank you in the box. And I do think that the other piece of it is a question about revising those goals, kind of keeping that backwards design as a continuous process. So I don't know if anybody wants.
That's an ongoing enhancement of quality. When we get to the end of an assessment cycle, we look at the results of the data, and then we determine if there's an improvement to be needed, and there's always a way to continuously improve our educational process. We look at, I'll tell you what, this is a really dangerous one that a lot of people go down. It must be the instructor or the professor's fault. We're going to look at assessment and then find out what the professor isn't doing right. Nope, red line. We're going to get that thing just completely off the stage. It might come later on, but we look at many, many different factors that might be contributing. And one of them, as you just pointed out, is we might need to revise those assessment goals. Maybe they were not accurate to begin with. And so we look at the assessment goals, we look at the processes that are being used in a course room, in a class, to help students get to that goal. We take a look at the assessment instruments. Maybe they are not aligned well with what the goals, the ultimate goals are. We've got to make sure that everything is in alignment with the process of assessment. So thank you. That's a very valid concern.
And I would just add on to that, I at another institution, I was once a part of a survey writing team who was attempting to write a survey, develop a survey that we were going to send out to students. But the team did not agree on what the goals were for the program they were running. So it was pretty much impossible to write a survey that was of agreement by the group because there was no agreement on the goals. So I think I like Monica pointed out another another comment here talking about needs assessment. So what we ended up recommending for that group is to do a series of focus groups with both within their departments and also with the students they serve to better understand the needs of those students and what the students were really seeking to get from that program, so we could come back and try to develop those goals for the program so we could actually write a meaningful assessment. So it's kind of an eye-opening thing about how important the goals were as part of the assessment process and how they can be revised through assessment. So I think that's a great comment.
Panelists, this is Paula again. There's another question in the Q&A that I think is something that a lot of us struggle with, because when I look across the titles that we all hold, our roles tend to be kind of broad, and we get our talents used in a multitude of ways. And the attendee here is asking, why institutional effectiveness? In other words, things that include, facilities, finance, community service that faculty members might do, adjunct negotiations. Why is that part of this statement? And how could you maybe come a little bit closer to describing what you mean by institutional effectiveness?
This is Jill. Jane Marie felt very strongly that institutional effectiveness be a part of the foundational statement, because folks in her position are members of the organization, and their work really is about assessing institutional effectiveness. And she kind of went back to I think it was the kind of charter of the organization, and institutional effectiveness was key to that. It was part of that. So that's kind of that's how my recollection of how it became a component of the foundational statement.
Thank you, Jill. I remember that we did have several extensive discussions about including institutional effectiveness in our definition, and Jane Marie built a really strong case. Again, I'm going to just refer to Linda Susky, her third edition of her book, Assessing Student Learning, a practical guide. She actually addresses institutional effectiveness, and she said ultimately an institution is effective if we are doing what we say we're doing, and that's educating students in whatever way they are going for their positions, their jobs, their careers. So she said ultimately when we are assessing institutional effectiveness, it does boil down to are our students learning what they're supposed to? I'm going to get my hand slapped by doing this, but I'm going. It's the simplest reduction of terms. Assessment is measuring. It's measuring outcomes. And so when we are measuring, how many volumes the library holds is what I used to have to be worried about when I was involved in accreditation. When we're measuring how many professors have PhDs, et cetera, we're measuring all of these things, but ultimately they all go into the hopper, and what comes out at the end of the hopper is if students are learning what they're supposed to. So the institutional effectiveness part of this is measuring what goes into the process in order to have that effective assessment of student learning outcomes at the end.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
context. That was really helpful and a kind of a great example of the transparency in your process that you're trying to extend here today. If there are other questions, remember, please put those in the Q&A so that we can ask our panelists.
We have maybe just another minute or two before we'll need to talk about our next steps and wrap up, but if there's one or two more questions we could address.
I'm not seeing anything right now, Jeremy, so if you want to carry on, we can maybe save a minute at the end for that last minute question.
Okay, yeah, so we'll wrap up here. So a couple of next steps for what's going to happen next. Our voting process will open on October 1st. So all of the AALHE members will get a personal invitation to complete the voting through SurveyMonkey. And what we really would like your help on is to help us get the word out about voting. So trying to get at least 50% participation is a pretty high bar for people who get many, many surveys and many requests for their time throughout the day. I'm trying to think of how many surveys I got last week. I think maybe 3 or 4, maybe. You get a lot more when you go on a trip because every hotel and airline and car rental place sends you a survey afterwards. So you get overwhelmed with these things. So hopefully we can find some ways to get the word out, and you can encourage your fellow colleagues who are members to vote and to engage in this process. So how you can help us, really, like I said, help us get the word out about the coming vote. If there's ways to encourage others to engage in the process, feel free to debate, discuss, share the statement with others. We'd also, again, at that bigger level, would like some feedback about the overall process we used. So is there a way to improve the steps we used to write the statement and to share the results of the group? As we pursue future statements, we would like to refine and improve the process as much as we can so it's as efficient and effective as we can make it. And also, if you're interested, think about participating in future foundational statements. It can be a commitment of time for sure, but it's also a great development opportunity, a great way to meet other members of the organization, and a great way to grow your knowledge on a topic that is of importance to the organization and to the profession. So hopefully, as these future opportunities come out, you'll think about volunteering to be part of those writing teams in the future. And then, of course, most importantly, remember to vote starting October 1st when the voting comes out, and just do it right away. So it's not something you have to come back to down the road. So to kind of wrap up, I wanted to share one last Woodstock picture. These are the owners of the farm where the concert was held, Max and Miriam Yasgur. And you can see the kind of presence and mess left behind by the concert goers behind them in the background. So they certainly, even though they had a great event and a great experience with the original Woodstock, there was still a lot of work to be done at the conclusion of the event. And I think we're in a similar place as AALHE, where we've got a great start. We've learned a lot about the process. We've got a statement that's going to go out to voting for the members, but still recognizing there's a long way to go too. We've got a lot of future potential work to build on this first round, and we look forward to the chance to work on these additional statements down the road. So any last comments from the other panelists or any final questions?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for attending.
Jeremy, can you tell us how long the vote will be open?
It should be open through October and probably into November. So our goal is, again, to get that 50% voting. So we should have plenty of time to get the word out and to encourage members to vote. And we'll send a number of reminders as well. So we try to get to that 50% participation level. So it'll be open for sure through October and into November.
Thank you. We have a suggestion that perhaps a frequently asked questions would be helpful for distribution around the time of the vote. And I'm hoping your team will take that under advisement.
Yeah, great idea.
Great idea, you bet.
Okay, and not seeing any other questions, this is your last chance to get one in, audience. I just want to say thank you so very much to Cynthia, Jill, and Jeremy. I think this has been a very interesting opportunity for us to to think about the growth and responsibility of our organization, and to really think about how we walk the walk of being a membership organization. And I want to applaud the effort that you've put into working through your values through the process. So thank you all for your work and for this webinar. Attendees, please don't forget that we'll be sending out an email to you later, and that will include a link to the evaluation for today's webinar, which we certainly hope you'll fill out to help us make sure that we're bringing you the webinars that you most want. Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon.